Hi, I'm Rosanne, and welcome to my garden. I'm totally hooked on flowering vines and climbers. I think that they and their decorative plant supports add so much dimension to the garden. Plus, this form of vertical gardening is a great space-saving way to get more from your garden if it's small or space is at a premium. In any given summer, we have about a dozen arbors, trellises, tutors, and other plant supports playing host to an array of annual and perennial vines. Today, I'd like to take you around our garden and show you some of my favorite ways I garden vertically. This is our newest addition this year. The seller called it a tutor, which, from my understanding, simply means a three-dimensional trellis, which this is. Regardless of the name, I absolutely am very fond of this shape. It is narrow and tall, and then it opens up to, well, an umbrella shape on the top. And it's perfect for this Jackmania Clematis to climb up through and then cascade downward, which Clematis likes to do, or at least Jackmanii does. So when it's in full bloom, we should have flowers, 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 and then they'll come up here and then they'll cascade down and there'll be more flowers, flowers, flowers. So stay tuned. I certainly plan on filming this more this summer. The Jackmania Clematis is a perennial vine that blooms throughout much of the summer. It requires very little maintenance other than consistent moisture and some fertilizer or compost. I started these plants from cuttings a few years ago. In the fall, I'll cut this one down to 2 or 3 feet. You'll notice that we have wire around the base of the plant. We do that to protect the plant from rabbits. Covering our shed door, we have this very rustic trellis my husband made from buckthorn. Now, buckthorn is a very invasive and nasty bush, tree, whatever. And so it was really good that he could turn something bad into something so good, because it's very hard wood. And we've had this trellis for about 15 years now. Over the years, I tried many different vines, including sweet autumn clematis. It was beautiful, but perhaps too bountiful. After that, I planted the Firecracker Vine, also known as the Spanish flag vine. It had interesting leaves and flowers that opened yellow and progressed to deep orange and red. It was a vigorous grower. For the last several years, I've been growing Love in a Puff vine. It frames the door perfectly and isn't a thug of a vine, at least here in Zone 4. It has these delightful green puffs, little white flowers, and delicate foliage. The pods eventually turn brown in the fall, which is when I harvest the seeds for the following spring. These seeds are often slow to germinate, so I always start seedlings indoors. Sometimes names are incredibly descriptive, as in this case. The seeds have a distinct marking on them that resembles a heart, and they came out of a puff, hence the name Love in a Puff. Or, in botanical terms, this plant is cardiospermum, or heart seed. Here I am on the south side of our garden shed, and it gets a lot of sun. So many annual climbing vines love this exposure. And here I have a rather unassuming wooden garden trellis. Now, this trellis has been host to many plants over the years. Some of my favorites would be the cardinal climber. Also, I had a lovely pink thunbergia. It was just absolutely stunning. And last year I had climbing snapdragon, and had the most delicate little purple flowers, and it was a great pollinator magnet as well. So I've had some really nice vines on this. This year I'm growing cardinal climber again, and what's really nice about cardinal climber is that it works best if you sow it directly, the seeds directly into the soil, and just keep it moist. So that was simple. I have about 7 plants coming up now. They're very small. I was a little late getting these planted, but I also have some chicken wire almost right above them, and that is to really help get them started. A lot of annual vines need help to get started. They don't automatically, you know, spring up and have the ability to twine around 1-inch wooden slats. This is our second maypole plant support. We got two because I like them so much. And here I have black-eyed Susan vine. That's the common name. It's also Thunbergia yellow. And I grew these from seeds. I will say I got these from my cousin, and I had 100% success rate. So that's great. I hope I have 100% success rate as they climb up the twine. Thunbergia are stem twiners, meaning that's how they ascend vertically. Their stems love this twine. It's really simple for them to grab onto and grow up. I'm really optimistic about how this is going to look in a month or so. This is probably our largest plant support. It's about 7 feet tall, and it's really heavy duty, so it can carry some pretty heavy vines. This year I'm growing the fragrant Corkscrew Vine. I started these from seeds. I've never grown them, so I'll see how they do. I like to experiment with new annual vines every year. Sometimes I go back to a tried and true, but it's fun trying new plants. Last year I grew a morning glory on it, and it didn't really flower much, but it did give me a lot of foliage, which was a really good look on this tall, narrow tutor. It provided a nice dimension of green on this very narrow bed, so I got height without you know, having a tree in here. My favorite vine so far on this was the Hyacinth bean vine. I love the way it looked, and I'm sure I'll be trying that in the next year or so again. Last winter, we lost our beloved weeping pussy willow tree, and it was quite a loss because it was an anchor in this kidney-shaped bed, and it added some real necessary height. So to achieve that same layering effect, but differently, we decided to try this plant support and grow annual vines on it. Now, this plant support is actually quite simple and elegant in its design. It's a stem, it has a cap with little hooks, and twine, and then we use landscape staples to hold the twine into the ground. And that's basically it. This year we're growing blush Thunbergia. I think it'll look lovely. This Thunbergia is a stem twiner, loves the twine, needs no help to get started. You just plant it and watch the plant climb up the twine. So I'm really excited about this one. This is probably one of my favorite plant supports. We call it our umbrella trellis. And you can see why. For obvious reasons, the top looks like an umbrella, and it has little hooks, and we attach twine to it all the way to the ground to some more supports that came with this trellis, the same decorative design elements. And it's overall has a very delicate looking feel to it. So I don't want to plant a very heavy or thug vine, such as morning glories, which are beautiful, but they can be very heavy and massive. What I like to plant are cathedral bells. And cathedral bells climb via tendrils. You can see these little tendrils reaching out from the stems, and they will grab onto whatever they can, be it twine or another stem or leaf or part of the cathedral bells. Also, I might add, cathedral bells, if you look at the shape of this gorgeous flower, it looks like a cathedral bell or a bell. It's also referred to as the cup and saucer vine, and if you imagine the flower upside down, you can see why it has that name as well. This is a repeat. I do cathedral bells, and I start them from seed every year. And at this point, I'll just say a few words about starting annual vines from seeds, because most of them, you know, they don't start getting a lot of presents till the middle of summer. So it's really important that the structure can make up for the lack of plant. And that's why I think so many of these structures are really garden art. Because right now, even with, you know, the cathedral bells only a foot off the ground, this is still an attractive feature in the yard. I also like starting annuals from seed because it gives me about a month head start on the whole process. We have such a short growing season here, and most of the annual vines really don't start flowering until August. This gives me a whole extra month to enjoy them. This is a pretty high-profile trellis right by our front door, so it's important to choose the right vine for it. We had this trellis custom made by an artisan blacksmith many years ago. We met him at an art fair, and we keep it out all winter because it's actually quite lovely in the winter too. It adds nice winter interest to the house. Because it's so beautiful, and I would definitely call this garden art, choosing the right vine is important, and I like to choose sort of a light and airy vine. I like to try different vines on this trellis to keep it interesting, and this year I'm trying the purple bellflower vine. I started these plants from seed, and I expect them to take off any day now. I'm thinking they'll look absolutely charming on this trellis. Over the years, my favorite vine has probably been the red cypress vine. It has feathery foliage and gorgeous little flowers. Plus, it's very easy to grow from seed. Last year, I was also pleased with the climbing snapdragon. It and the trellis accentuated each other perfectly. This is our original Jackmania Clematis, and it never disappoints. Soon it'll be covered with beautiful purple blooms. And the best part is, it's growing up a downspout, or actually a wire plant support made specifically for downspouts. Here's a picture taken in spring where you can really see the wire support. Because this clematis is so robust, I find that the best way to control it and keep the stems growing upright is to use twine and tie it loosely to the support about every 2 feet. Ferns growing around the base keep the roots shaded and moist. This Jackmanii also gets a balanced organic fertilizer 2 or 3 times every summer. This is our garden entrance. What a wonderful way to welcome garden visitors. Above me, growing on the arbor, I have Blue Moon Wisteria. We've been growing this for about 10 years, and it comes back every spring and blooms profusely with very little help. I've never fertilized this plant. It loves the western and southern exposure, however, so I think that has a lot to do with it. It needs sun. It climbs by twining its stems around a structure. Now, over time, those stems can get pretty thick and strong. So it's important that you have an equally strong structure for the wisteria to climb on. It can get aggressive, so you need to be careful to prune those wayward stems to make sure they don't go where they're not wanted. And in the fall, I give this a very hard prune. Lastly, the fragrance is intoxicating. A real perennial beauty is our William Baffin climbing rose. Every June, it covers the wooden trellis on the south side of our house. Most so-called climbing roses don't really climb on their own, but need to be tied to a trellis or loosely woven in and around the wooden slats. My husband made this trellis specifically for this space and our desire to grow climbing roses. Due to overgrowth, we cut our climbing rose back quite a lot a year ago, and it's still growing back into shape. We hope to grow it back to its former glory. Sometimes you see roses that look like they're effortlessly climbing up the wall of a building. In reality, they are more than likely tied to a barely visible wire or cable. Lastly, I would be remiss to not bring up containers. They're such a great way to soften up and dress up lonely corners. Here we have a sweet pea plant beginning to climb up a tutor. Surrounding it, for added color, I have a mixture of annual flowers. We're done with our garden tour, and I hope I've inspired you to include vertical gardening in your garden design if you haven't already. Also, be sure to match the vine with the structural support, both in terms of how it climbs and grows, as well as the aesthetics. Lastly, I hope you'll try some new annual vines. Seeds are a great way to get started. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.